Welcome to Passion for Payroll, the podcast. I'm Max.
And I'm Khizar.
And we're here for the passionate payroll pros who build trust, you deliver quietly, consistently, and usually without applause. This is for you.
No fluff, no buzzwords, always fun. Just what works, what doesn't, and what you can do on a Monday morning.
So, if you're passionate about payroll, then this is your podcast.
Let's get into it.
So, how are you, my friend?
Good. Fasting still going on. So if
Oh.
you see a bit of low energy, just pump me up like you are transferring the energies everywhere. But so far, so good. Busy week. I'm glad it's coming to an end. And
Yes.
what about you?
Well, it's Friday the 13th today. Yeah, we're recording on Friday the 13th. So there must be some technical glitches at some point. But no, I'm actually thinking of looking at a very good, scary Friday the 13th classic horror movie. It probably makes me think that we need to also cover a horror story at some point.
That would
But
be
hey, look, you're fasting, which is awesome. That you're doing that. I respect you for it, but I don't envy you. I don't want to be in your shoe.
I mean, trust me. And now we're used to it, so it doesn't hurt that much. But the sleep part, yes, sometimes it's the lack of sleep that kills us. But yeah,
It's
good
not
to
the
get
first
strong.
time, no, that you've done
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
All right, as usual, right? We have a poll question. So I think I asked this some time ago. I don't know exactly when I asked, but I asked this question to the followers. Do you have a clearly defined global payroll policy?
Okay.
And I had 4 different voting options, and I'll share them based on the results. 55% said no, we don't have that.
Yeah. Wow.
21% said documented, but not used.
Wow.
Another 21% said yes and actively used. And 3% said, I don't know, to be honest.
I'm also skeptical because I was thinking when you shared this poll that even the ones who said yes, are they able to differentiate between a policy and a procedure document? Because usually we know that there sometimes even for people like us who have been in this business, it's hard to differentiate between a policy document for especially for payroll and procedures like steps, task lists. So that's also something. But I'm not surprised that 55% said no. And that has been my experience as well. But Max, before we get into the details of how the global policy works, what are the pros and cons, why it's needed, maybe for our viewers, you can simplify, referencing from your book, what is slightly different between a global payroll policy, what it can include, very high level, and why is it different from a procedure? So I'm putting you on the spot, but it helps build
Always
that
doing that.
connection.
You're always putting me on. So what I'm actually frantically doing now is for my events, I have handouts, and I've actually just finished my handout today for the session that we will have in Barcelona.
Looking
Which
forward to it, my friend.
exactly, and you will be there. So here it is, right? Policy in my world and my framework is part of governance. You're also talking about procedures. A procedure is also important, but for me, that is part of delivery. Procedure, some call it a standard operating procedure. I've called it a payroll playbook because it sounds nicer than a procedure. And a policy really, for me, is the go-to document whenever a decision needs to be made. So it kind of clarifies what type of service delivery models you have. It clarifies the segregation of duties between, okay, we say that one person submits the payroll, one person approves the payroll, and that can never be the same person, right? As a segregation of duty. That's kind of a policy element. And it kind of sets the framework for decision making, and it promotes what we all want, which is consistency, standardization, and some best practices in global payroll. Therefore, I always say, my friend, if you don't have a payroll policy, it is very difficult to achieve standardization and to leverage kind of best practices. And I usually have a policy that starts with 10 chapters, like the scope, right? Does it scope to all payrolls, in-house, outsourced, local, shared service center, whatever? It has a couple of policy components like, organizational structure, where gets work done, data management, simple things, Khazar. The policy is, do we share payroll documents like a payslip,
Yeah.
employees over email or not? That's what a
True.
policy defines.
Exactly.
So,
I mean, spot on. I think what you just summarize and with examples, I think it becomes a bible for the payroll person, like a
yeah,
playbook, right? It covers principles, governance, you told standards, accountability. It covers all that which is supposed to be uh, the go-to document or a handbook or whatever you call it for a payroll person for their actual well-being actually that they can follow, they can scale, they can standardize and then move forward. And also it ensures compliance at the same time, so it's not a list of tasks only, but it covers a broader perspective.
it's higher level, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But look, it can also be a very boring document. Let's be honest.
Much.
Right? I've written a couple of policies, and I'm a geek, as you know. I think you're becoming a geek, Gezar, that also likes to write a policy. But um, the difficulty is, oh, we've all written a policy, and it's great, everyone has it, but let's dust it off every once in a while because nobody
Yeah,
really uses it.
exactly.
I've supported a customer where I've also shared this to say, oh, we've all agreed on a policy. The CHRO endorsed the policy, which defined, roles and responsibilities. That particular policy also included the sequential steps of payroll, how the global payroll process is designed, what type of controls should be executed at which stage gate, like pre-payroll, run payroll, post payroll. You should have a variance control, an input versus output, all that stuff, right? You know this. But then we said, okay, we all agree, but now the world needs to kind of implement the policy. So what do we do, right? So that this doesn't just become a great, well-written policy that no one uses.
No, I think going back to your poll and your comment and that's one of the reasons why many companies avoid it. Although, if you look at a bigger context, payroll is what do you say? 60% of the operational cost for a company in
At least,
human,
yeah.
at least, especially in normal companies. And the lack of, or 55% who said that it's not there is alarming in itself,
Yeah.
because if that big portion of your operating expense is not governed
By a policy.
by a policy, and you can have finance policies, travel policies, you can have different, especially I've been lucky to work in many multinationals along like you as well. So we have never felt that pain, but I've also worked for clients in my past experience who do not have that document or that defining governance model like you just explained. And being an auditor in the past, the first thing we always ask is,
Yeah.
where is your policy?
Because you need to test the
Exactly.
right the operations against the policy. If there's no policy, who
Exactly.
decides what you need to do?
And that's applicable for every process. So why not payroll? And maybe we can dive into some of the reasons why companies do not have one. So maybe I can start with that because I've been putting you on the spot. So one
You're
of the
basically asking
common,
yourself a question now, Hazar, which is
yeah, and
great.
then
I'll
and
just
then
sit back and relax. Yeah.
you come in. But I was pondering that why 55% or and the other 21 also percent says we don't know, or we have a document but we don't use it, because there is this notion in payroll that payroll is always local. And
Mm.
again, that confusion between policy and procedure and steps and task list versus a governance model is like, okay, we need to manage it in our own kingdom. That
Yeah,
has
yeah.
been a dilemma in the past for me, at least, that yeah, there have been kingdoms and queendoms that we will manage payroll according to our way of working. So I want you to elaborate more, because for me that was one of the primary reasons why companies, especially now, there is more exposure in this area. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that one?
I have no thoughts at all. No, no, no. I always have thoughts.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
that
I'll
was an
get back to
alarming
your point
statement.
first. I think I want to link it to policy adoption, right? when you've written a policy and everyone agrees, and I've also been fortunate enough, like you, Khazar, to have worked in multinational companies where a policy was a must. But I've also worked in companies where it wasn't. Um, and going back to this particular customer where we had this debate on how are we going to enforce it, what we did was pretty revolutionary because, well, I've never seen it before. I think you may have never seen it, but you'll
Mm,
tell me. Is that they've actually created an e-learning course
mm, mm,
about the policy. So what you call this is gamification, right? You learn through kind of a game. There is a question, you get a good result. You need to have at least like 8 out of 10. You know this with all the compliance courses you need to do in a big corporate, right? Around data. They've actually done this for the payroll policy, the global payroll policy. And everyone who was identified as having a role, whether minor or big or substantial,
mm,
in
mm.
the payroll process needed to complete this course that shows that they know what the policy is about and they understand what their role is before they can actually collaborate in a payroll process. That's how they done it. Have you ever seen that?
Uh, like I said, I've been lucky in a few organizations with this kind of gamification and courses. So, and I think it's a good industry practice. But this is one of the ways that you can, you know, take the boredom out of that policy document, like
Yes.
you said, and make it more fun, make it more engaging for the employees
Yeah.
and anyone who's touching payroll. So it like you said, even if someone who has one click to do in in a process or send data over to payroll, or even if they are copied as in the process of payroll just for information, so they would know what payroll is about. And then that becomes, let's say, the basis of improving the process itself in an
Yes.
organization. I think that's one of the best ways to transfer that knowledge on the policy side of things, and also make people aware about what payroll actually is and the importance of payroll. Again, going back to the 60% and more than 60% of the operating cost in a company, that is a big chunk. So if it is left un unmanaged or not governed properly, then will be a lot of risks that can cause leakages, compliance issues, and whatever we have discussed in the past about the risk associated with no policy at all. So I think that's one of the nice ways or
Yeah.
effective ways to do that. So yeah, and I've been lucky to be part of such courses or design courses internally. So that's a
Yeah,
good
luck or not, I don't know if it's luck. I
thing.
don't really believe in luck. I believe in creating your own momentum, but
Yeah.
that's maybe a whole different topic. I want to come back to your one question that you asked about local adoption.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of practices who do just, okay, we define this global policy at the global level. And then at some point we go to the countries and enforce this upon them, right? This is how you
Yeah.
need to do it. Well, if you want to get resistance, then that's the approach, right? To do it. So,
Exactly.
and it doesn't take a scientist that I think maybe, just maybe, we need to include some key stakeholders across the region countries in the creation of,
Change management. Yeah.
yeah.
To
But
promote change management.
that's
Yeah.
it. But it's, I think it's goes even more than change management. It's kind of an enforce embrace thing, where change management is sometimes perceived as, oh, we also need to inform others. Like, oh yeah, you're
Exactly.
still
Yeah.
blah, blah. No, actually involving them in the design and say, hey, we've written this control. Would that be how you operate it? No, not really. But if you include this, then yes. I said, okay, great. And then you already have kind of an endorsement. And then the socialization becomes easier. So just involve them, right?
No, and that's a perfect example. I can share very recently, as part of our review of design or a touch point with our finance, who is also a stakeholder with payroll. That's one of the prime examples. When you involve, it's not about, okay, we have done this and you have to follow, or they have done it, we have to follow. But okay, what are your pain points? How we can improve the process end to end? Where is your problem areas or our problem areas in this interaction? So that helps, because then it also creates that sense of ownership, and that sense of belonging in the entire process. Even if you are just an organization or a person getting information on the global policy of payroll or any policy at all, at the end of the day, it is how the people will be affected by it. And most of the time when you're building a policy, I am an advocate that you build it with the feedback from bottom up. So
Yeah,
even
yeah,
get your specialists involved,
exactly.
maybe to a very limited extent, but at least they would know why we are doing it, why there is a global policy and not a local policy, why this portion covers 80% of standardization and 20% is left locally, because that's how good
Still
global
nuances.
organizations do it. Yeah. So again, like you said, engagement, not to the extent that okay, this is FYI,
Yeah.
but this is FYA for your action as well. So
Yes.
so this is something that we usually see in good organizations, or well oiled organizations where there is a buy-in from everyone.
And
Yeah.
thinking about your acronyms, Khazar, FYI and FYA, maybe in this context, FYI means for your involvement
Yes, yes.
instead of
That
for your information. And
information.
you've called yourself lucky a couple of times, my
I
friends.
am lucky. I always call myself lucky, my friend.
I look, you call yourself whatever you want, but I don't think you're lucky. I believe in creating your own momentum. But for the people listening and thinking these guys have now talked about a payroll policy for 17 minutes, and I'm never going to create a policy, that I really hope you're going to rethink that
Yeah.
assessment, right? Because I have worked in organizations where there was no policy, where there was no framework. There were still payrolls going out of the door. It was still accurate, right? It was still good. Because I've had people come up to me at events or on LinkedIn, like, oh, you're sharing this about policies, but I've been a payroll manager for the past 10 years. I've always hit my deadlines. I've always paid everyone on time. So why do I need a policy? Then I'm like, look, I can't force you to write a policy. And kudos to you for keeping everyone paid accurately and compliantly and on time and yada, yada, yada. That's great. But if we really want to kind of elevate, right, our role, our visibility, all of that space. And if you want to be confident enough to say to an auditor, whether internal or external, this is how we do things. And if you want to become dispensable, which I always think a manager needs to become dispensable, not indispensable,
Yes,
write down what you do. You probably
exactly.
are in a great position because you already operate as if you have a policy. Just write the policy because you need it for so many different reasons, for visibility, for internal audit, for external audit, for retention if you should ever leave, for upskilling your team.
Scalability, Max. I recently again have an example, and all of these what you mentioned are the common issues that we are discussing here,
Yeah,
and this is our day to day life. That and I me as a manager, as a leader in the past and even in the present, I tell what you just said, that it is important not to be people dependent but process dependent in our life. And we
yes.
see historically, even now, there are shades that okay, we are so much people dependent that the knowledge sits here and the person leaves and then everything leaves. And I see it in vendors as well, that one person
18
leaves.
knowledge transfer. Yeah.
Yes, so there is no like a governing document. Like that policy can have layers and layers, like you mentioned. You can add tasks, you can add whatever you do, even if you're lifting a cup. I asked my team members that put it there so tomorrow we can assess that does this lifting a cup come in our scope or not in our scope. So again,
Yeah.
these are some fun ways of uh, sharing with our viewers and listeners that why this policy matters. Yeah.
Well,
A-
it's
And again, and again, I was mentioning about scalability. What happens when all of a sudden your company acquires another business or you are getting a merger, right? What happens then? Then you have two different ends of the world, different ways of working. How are you going to do that? So there are a lot of real life examples where having a policy and a governance
yeah.
makes that transformation much easier. If, for example, let's take one of, I know we will discuss this in future podcasts. But you recently had another poll. I will not disclose it, but
Yeah, yeah. Cliffhanger.
yeah, the designs that we have, right,
Yes.
becomes which becomes part of the policy.
When you shared this cup idea of analogy, I was frantically googling because it made me think of the movie, and it's an old movie, so I'm really dating myself here. But it is a movie um, in from 2000, so it's 26 years old. It's called Rules of Engagement.
Ah.
With Samuel L. Jackson, Tommy Lee Jones, and others. And there is a scene there that talks about the manual, right? It's about the army
Yeah.
and everything, and two
Yeah.
guys are whatever. And then it talks about the manual because that's their main line of defense. Then this lawyer walks up and says, "Do you go to the mess hall, right, to eat?" I said, "Yeah, of course." "Well, how do you know how to go to the mess hall?" And these two soldiers who are allegedly convicted, well, are you serious, right? Is that a serious question? Right? Of course, I know where to go. That's the mess hall. And then this lawyer says, but it's not in the manual. So how do you then know what to do? And that kind of trapped them between this is a manual, i.e., what we're talking about,
Of
a
course.
policy,
Yes. Yeah.
and then there is a practice.
Practice. Yeah.
We're not taking away the human side of payroll savviness and the payroll practice. I think what we're
Or
just
localization.
yeah,
Or localization.
or
Yeah. Yeah.
localization.
Yeah.
We're just saying write down at least the fundamentals of what is
Exactly.
critically important to bridge the gap between this is a strategy, this is practice, and if there's nothing in between, then what sits in between is our big brain and our big head. At least I have a big head. And if that head leaves to another company, then there's nothing bridging strategy and practice. So
Yes. Yes.
just bridge the gap by just writing a freaking policy. And if you don't
Exactly.
know how to, hey, you can always reach out to us. We might have a template. We might have a good
Yeah.
idea,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Or you can refer to the Global Managers Playbook.
of course,
Yeah.
yeah, you always,
Yeah. Yeah.
yes, yes, but only, I'll
Yeah.
admit, only to a certain extent. Right? I've not written a whole
but
policy
but
template.
but people can reach out to the likes of you, me,
Yeah,
or
of
there are
course.
there are a lot of very well versed payroll professionals in our network or beyond that. And again, like you said, it's as simple as putting down what you believe, what you want to achieve, what is right, what is the governance model, what are the matrices. It can be everything and anything you want to put. But one thing I always say, Max, and again, it comes down to the earlier point that you were mentioning, that let's not make it boring. So we have to not wipe the dust and review it once in a while. Make
Yes.
that an active document, because it should serve a purpose for your own well-being rather than for a check box in a company or in a multinational or
Yeah.
in an environment that requires a lot of documents, because that reference document is to help us, like we said, to answer things on governance, accountability, future scalability, and all of those topics. So I think for me, policy in any process is
Yeah.
important. Payroll is even more important because, again, it has a big social impact on our lives as well.
It
And we,
does. But you know what?
um,
What you shared made me think of it. When you share something, I always think of a story of a movie. Now this time it's a story, Khazar. So you trigger me. It's I was invited, I think last year November, with another consultant to deliver a kind of a ideation, thought provoking workshop to. Was a kind of a scale up company. I think they had 8 countries, about 1,000 employees. So not too big, not too small, but big enough to think we need to do something with global payroll. Right, we can't just do this locally anymore. And we actually had a great discussion about a policy. And I think the topic there transcended the policy itself, because it's not just about a document. It's about the principles in the document. And we started talking about what I think is basic stuff, Hazar. And
yes,
I know you'll agree, is segregation of duties.
yeah, absolutely,
And we were debating um, the person who submits the payroll, processes the inputs, cannot be the same person as the person who approves the payroll. That's what I said.
absolutely, absolutely.
And
I
then,
agree with you on this one, by the way.
thank you, I knew you would. But in the context of this call, The finance director, who was ultimately responsible, financial controller responsibly for
Yeah.
payroll, was in the call. The consultant was in the call. There were 3 payroll managers in the call, and there was a CFO on the call. And I shared this, assuming that everyone who touches payroll, has this principle of segregation of duties. Then this lady, bless her, steps up and says, unmutes herself and says, well, Max, I've just approved the payroll that I've also submitted. Then another one goes off mute who says, yeah, me too. Yeah, we just don't have the bandwidth to do this. And we have time zones. The financial controller and the CFO are also in the call. And I'm sharing my slides and I have a book and SOD. And here you have our colleagues, payroll colleagues, just saying with no shame, like shameless, no. I just, I submitted payroll. I approved payroll. No one else looked at this payroll. And then I said, and are you also on the payroll yourself? She said, yeah, I'm also on the payroll yourself. Well, you don't think that's a problem?
I mean,
And then she's like, I said it friendlier, by the way. Whoever thinks of wanting me in a workshop, I was very polite. I was very polite. I'm exaggerating here just for the stories.
But the financial controller should not have been polite after that conversation.
I think a conversation happened after that call, Khizar. But it makes me think of, and I know we're getting close to kind of wrapping up, but the excuse, and I call it deliberately an excuse and not a reason for not having this, at least this basic segregation of duty of someone submits, someone approves, just because I'm in another time zone, just because I'm in the US and I don't know European payroll. This is the business case for a policy. If you just say, these are the standards, these are the controls that need to be done, then you could have one person submit the payroll and one person review the results and create all the controls, but then at least have another person look at it to say, okay, this is the policy. These controls need to be executed. Is it properly evidenced? With my common payroll sense, I will know if there is an error or not, right? And then I can safely approve a payroll, regardless of times and regardless of if you've been exposed to another country. So I think case closed, policy needs to be there.
I mean, we are advocates of it because we know why it's important,
Yeah.
especially for bigger organizations, which has, again, that bigger financial risk. And again, like you said, if you're on your own payroll and you're approving something,
Right.
then because, there is a funny, before we wrap up, there is this, we have all heard about this 4 eyes concept, right?
Yes.
So this lady reminds me what you mentioned, that she has 2 eyes here and 2 eyes on her back of her head. So she's just doing her own self. But just to wrap it up, but I think this conversation can go on and on and on because there are so many layers to
Yes.
how many things you can add in a policy, how you can standardize it, localize it, and then keep on adding it. At the end of the day, we should know that for anything, like even governments, even companies, even sports team, everyone needs a policy to function, right? You can't just have a haphazard world running around. Everything needs a policy, right?
Can't do without. And for
Exactly.
this specifically, I'm not saying that she's committing fraud. I'm not saying that she's not
Yeah.
approving a right payroll, but
Yeah.
you just don't want this, right?
Exactly.
You just don't want to have the risk exposure of this, and we just need to get that freaking policy in place. Look, how can we have talked for 30 minutes about a policy, Khizar? We must be very, very passionate about this thing called payroll.
Of course. And we can, like I said, we can go on and on and on. We will not stop, but
And we
I
will
think
not
for
torture
listeners and
you
viewers, yeah.
any longer. So, everyone, that's a wrap on Passion for Payroll, the podcast.
If you're passionate about payroll as we are, follow us, me, Max, on LinkedIn for more stories, polls, and real talk.
Exactly. Until next time, friends.
Bye-bye.